My sister didn't introduce me at my father's anniversary party the way you introduce family. She introduced me the way you point out a crack in the wall, just enough to explain why the house looks the way it does. She found me near the drinks table, her hand landing on my elbow, with that particular grip she has. The one that looks affectionate from 6 feet away and feels like a warning up close. "There's someone you need to meet," she said. Her smile was the same one she used in investor decks. Bright, expensive, designed to close. The venue was a restored ballroom in downtown Nashville. Vaulted ceilings, brass fixtures, floor-length windows that caught the city lights, like a mirror practicing for something grander. My father had built his commercial contracting firm over 30 years, and tonight was the celebration of that. 300 guests, partners, clients, city officials, people whose handshakes came with 7 figures attached, the kind of room where the catering staff dress better than I do on most days. My name is Nora. I'm 32 years old. I work in infrastructure cybersecurity specifically. I find the places inside critical systems where the architecture lies to itself: power grids, water treatment networks, transit management software, the invisible backbone of cities. When those systems have vulnerabilities, most of them don't announce it. They just wait, quietly, for someone patient enough to listen. That's what I do. I listen to systems the way a doctor listens to a chest, not for what it says, but for the pause between beats where something goes wrong. I don't post about it. I've never been on a panel. I don't have a LinkedIn headline. I have a government clearance, a laptop that never leaves my apartment, and a client list I'm not allowed to name at dinner parties. My family has no idea what I actually do. They stopped trying to understand around the time I turned 26 and couldn't explain my job without using words that made their eyes glaze over. After that, they just filed me under quiet and moved on. My sister Danielle is 37 and runs the communications division of my father's firm. She is everything our family rewards. She photographs beautifully, networks effortlessly, and has turned the art of being in the right room into something close to a professional sport. She's been angling to take over the firm for 3 years, and tonight was as much her stage as my father's procking. The man she was steering me toward stood near the center of the room, with the particular stillness of someone who has spent decades being the most important person present and no longer needs to perform it. Late 60s. Silver-haired. A dark suit that sat perfectly without looking like it was trying to. His name was Gerald Marsh. I knew the name, the way you know the names of weather systems. You track them from a distance. You respect their scope. Gerald Marsh had built Marsh Infrastructure Solutions into one of the largest private utility management companies in the southeastern United States. Power grid contracts, water, authority partnerships, municipal broadband buildouts. The kind of operation that keeps cities from going dark. My father had been trying to land a partnership with Marsh for 2 years. Tonight was supposed to be the conversation that made it real. And Danielle, in her infinite choreography, had apparently decided that parroting me past him was part of the evening's entertainment. She positioned us perfectly. The 3 of us formed a small triangle near the center of the room, where enough people could watch without appearing to. Danielle's hand stayed on my elbow. "Gerald," she said warmly. "This is my little sister Nora." Her voice shifted into that register, still sweet but carrying just enough of a lower note. "The one that signals a punchline is coming? She's the family's little mystery. She does something with computers." She laughed lightly. "We've honestly never been totally sure what." There was a gentle ripple of amusement from the 2 men standing with Gerald. My mother, who had materialized at Danielle's shoulder, added helpfully. "She's always been the quiet one. Very independent. Set in the tone people use when independent means difficult." I kept my expression steady. I've had 20 years of practice at that particular skill. Gerald Marsh looked at me. not the polite scan of a man at a party confirming you exist. He looked at me the way you look at something, when your memory is trying to catch up to what your eyes are showing you. His head tilted slightly, his drink stilled halfway to his mouth. And then his face did something I didn't expect. It went very careful, very deliberate. The way a person looks when they're deciding how much of their reaction to let the room see. He said my name, not as a question, as a confirmation. Quiet. Almost private. Like something he'd been holding onto without knowing he'd need it. Nora. He said. That's right. Danielle continued, filling the silence pleasantly. Not yet reading it. She's always been... Gerald wasn't listening to her anymore. He was still looking at me. And now there was something in his expression that the ballroom lighting couldn't quite flatten. Something that looked from the inside of my chest. Like recognition. You work in infrastructure security, he said. It wasn't a question. My sister's hand went rigid on my elbow. My mother's smile flickered. I do, I said. He set his drink down on the passing tray of a waiter who hadn't offered to take it. A small thing. A deliberate thing. The movement of a man reallocating his full attention. Danielle laughed the slightly too high laugh of a person who's just realized the room has shifted beneath her feet. I think you might be thinking of someone else, she said. Nora does freelance work. Gerald looked at her then. Very briefly. Very kindly. In the way that ends conversations, then he looked back at me. Is there somewhere we can speak privately, he asked. The room around us had one of those moments where the ambient noise doesn't drop, but somehow the silence still registers. I saw my father look over from across the room with the expression of a man watching a chess game he doesn't understand. I said yes. We found a small room off the main corridor. A private dining space. Dark wood and low light. The sounds of the party, muffled behind a closed door. Gerald Marsh stood by the window and didn't bother with any of the usual reordering of social furniture. He just looked at me and said, 4 years ago, you filed an anonymous vulnerability report through a federal infrastructure disclosure channel. The utility management systems, ours specifically. I didn't answer right away. The report outlined a cascading failure vector in the SCADA integration layer of our Eastern Grid management software. He continued. 11 specific vulnerabilities, cross-referenced against 3 active threat actor profiles. With a patch sequence and a timeline. He paused. Whoever wrote it also included a secondary document, a projection of what a successful exploit would look like, mapped against our actual infrastructure topology. He said this slowly, as if the weight of it still hadn't fully distributed across his body. The scenario they described the cascade, the affected municipalities, the projected outage duration. I knew what came next. I had written what came next, 3 months after that report, he said quietly. A threat actor hit a water treatment facility in Georgia using almost exactly that vector. Because we had already patched our systems based on that report, we were able to isolate and assist. We kept our network clean. We helped prevent what would have been a regional crisis. The room was very still. I filed the report anonymously. I said, I know. He said, the disclosure channel protects that. We tried to identify the source through every legitimate avenue available to us. His mouth tightened at the edges. We came up empty. Security contractors we hired to trace the methodology said whoever wrote it had a fingerprint unlike anything they'd seen in private practice. They assumed it was a government analyst moonlighting. I didn't say anything. He looked at me with the clear-eyed steadiness of a man who has spent a career reading people across tables. Were you working for anyone when you wrote it? He asked. No, I said. I'd done a network audit for a municipal client. Adjacent systems. I found the thread and I pulled it. I saw where it led. I couldn't unknow it. He nodded slowly. As if something had just been confirmed rather than revealed. Why anonymous? He asked. I thought about the real answer for a moment, which is that I'd been 28 years old and consulting independently for 18 months. After leaving a federal contractor job under circumstances I didn't feel like narrating to a stranger. I thought about the fact that at the time I didn't have the kind of credentials that make large companies take unsolicited reports seriously. I thought about the fact that I had grown up being told that what I was good at was difficult, obscure, and not the kind of thing that made people lean forward at dinner. Because the report needed to be taken seriously, I said, and at the time, my name didn't help that. Gerald Marsh looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "It does now." He was quiet for a beat after that. "Then, we've had an incident. Internal. Not a breach from outside, something more complicated. We have reason to believe someone inside our network infrastructure has been manipulating access logs and rerouting operational data in a way that creates exploitable windows. Small ones. Regular ones. And someone outside is waiting for them." My pulse shifted into the gear it finds when a problem shows itself. It started 8 months ago. He continued. Subtle enough that our own team flagged it as system noise for 6 months. The pattern only emerged when we ran a longitudinal analysis. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. We believe it's deliberate. We believe someone inside the company is either being coerced or compensated to create these windows. I said, "You need an independent set of eyes. Someone without prior exposure to your internal culture or loyalties?" He said, "Yes. Someone who can read the architecture without reading the politics first." "Yes," he said again. I thought about the folder that didn't exist yet. The one I would build from access logs and network maps and the specific grammar of systems that are lying to themselves. I thought about the thread. "And what happens when you pull it? Tell me about the architecture." I said, "That was 4 weeks before the night my sister led me through the kitchen door of my own family home and introduced me to my parents as the good news she had somehow managed to generate." She called me on a Wednesday afternoon. The voice bright, with the particular energy she deploys when she needs something. "Nora," she said, "I hope you know that whatever is happening with Gerald Marsh is because of me. I introduced you. I want to make sure we're both clear on that." I was looking at a network map on my second monitor. I said, He's obviously interested in hiring you for something, and I think it's worth remembering that Dad's partnership deal with him is still on the table. So whatever you're doing, it might be good to keep that in mind. Don't complicate things." "What would complicate things?" I asked. She laughed. "You know how you can get, Nora, intense. It's not a criticism. It's just what I said. Just make sure, whatever you find, you think about the family first." I understood then that she already knew something was wrong inside Marsh's company. Or at least she suspected. And she was asking me. In the language our family has always used with me. Careful, cushioned, with just enough plausible warmth to avoid accountability to be quiet about it if it was bad. I said, "I'll do good work." She said, "That's not what I asked." I said, "I know." She hung up. 2 days later, my mother called. She opened with the particular warmth she reserves for conversations that need something from me. "Sweetheart, how are you?" And then, after barely a pause, "We heard Gerald Marsh has been spending time with you. That's so exciting for the family. Your father is really hoping this doesn't interfere with the business relationship we're building." She said this as if my work were an inconvenient weather event, rather than the reason Gerald Marsh had sought me out at all. I said, "Mom," she said, "we're not asking you to do anything wrong. We just want you to be thoughtful. About timing. About what you share and when." I looked at my screen. The access logs were open. The pattern was already there. Growing clearer every hour. A shadow inside a system. Deliberate and shaped like greed. I'll be thoughtful, I said. What I found inside the Marsh infrastructure network over those 4 weeks was this: a senior network engineer named Callum, who had been quietly modifying access permission logs on a rotating schedule, not randomly, with a precision that suggested he either wrote part of the original architecture or had spent months studying it before he started. He created Windows' small gaps in logging continuity, invisible to routine monitoring, visible only in the aggregate, and into those windows, someone external was inserting reconnaissance packets, light touches, the digital equivalent of testing a lock without turning it. The external actor wasn't sophisticated. What they were was patient. And Callum had been giving them a calendar. When I traced Callum's financial records, which I did through the access Gerald's legal team had authorized, I found the payment structure: 11 transactions over 8 months, routed through 2 shell entities and a cryptocurrency conversion. Not large amounts. Enough to confirm it wasn't negligence or sloppiness. It was a decision. What made my stomach go cold on the 3rd week wasn't Callum. It was the entity on the other end of the transactions. I traced the shell structure through 3 layers of incorporation. It took me most of a night and a consultation with a financial forensics contact who owed me from a previous engagement. What I found at the end of the chain was a holding company registered in Delaware, inactive for most of its existence. Reactivated 18 months ago, the registered agent was a law firm my family used. I sat with that information for a long time. I ran it twice. Then I ran it a 3rd time, because I wanted to be wrong. I wasn't wrong. The holding company was connected to a fund that had been quietly acquiring Marsh Infrastructure's competitor contracts, specifically contracts in markets where Marsh had experienced operational disruptions. If Marsh's grid management systems showed unreliability, those contracts would migrate to competitors, to the fund's portfolio companies. I looked at the fund's founding documentation. It was 4 years old. Created the same year Danielle had been promoted to run communications. The same year my father had started making overtures toward a Marsh partnership. In business, I know these things can be coincidence. In families, I've learned, they usually aren't. I called Gerald's attorney directly. Not Gerald. His attorney. I said I needed to schedule a session to present my findings and that the meeting should include Gerald, his board's audit committee, and legal. I said there were elements of the finding that were sensitive in nature and that I wanted to present them in a controlled setting. The attorney asked if I needed to speak to anyone before the meeting. I said no. I didn't call my sister. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call my father, who was still somewhere in the same city, dreaming of a handshake deal with a man whose systems I had spent 4 weeks unwinding. I went back to my work, and I finished it. Completely. Precisely. The meeting happened on a Thursday morning in a conference room on the 14th floor of the Marsh Solutions building. Gerald sat at one end. 4 board members. 2 attorneys. An outside forensic accountant Gerald had engaged after I indicated the scope of the finding. I presented the network analysis first. The access log modifications, the window structure, the external reconnaissance pattern, Callum's role, the payment chain. Then I presented the financial forensics, slowly, without editorializing. I let the documentation do what documentation does when it's allowed to tell the truth, by accumulating detail until the shape of it becomes undeniable. When I put the holding company on screen, one of the board members leaned forward. "Is this connected to the contracting firm?" he said. "Meaning my father's firm," I said. "The registered agent shares legal representation with a company in that family. The fund itself appears to be independently established. But the relationships warrant additional investigation I'm not positioned to complete. What I can tell you is what the documents show." Gerald looked at the screen for a long time. He didn't look at me. He looked at the data, the way I've seen certain people look at bad news, not with shock, Because shock is for people who were never truly prepared. But with the quiet, exhausted recognition of someone who had wondered if something was wrong and is now learning that they were right to wonder, he said, "Thank you, Nora." Just that, simple, meant entirely. Callum was placed on immediate administrative suspension pending the formal investigation. The attorney indicated federal disclosure was likely required. Gerald's security team began a full access review. My phone had 17 missed calls from Danielle before I reached the lobby. I called her back when I was in my car, with the engine running. She skipped any warmth at all this time. "What did you do?" she said. I presented my findings. I said, "You named the fund." She said it like an accusation. I documented what the investigation found. I said, "What Gerald and his legal team do with it is their decision. That is our family." Nora. Her voice cracked on the word family. Not with grief. With something harder. "You sat in that room I sat in that room and I told the truth." I said. About systems someone deliberately compromised. Her breathing changed. "We could have handled this quietly. Gerald would have understood. He doesn't want a scandal any more than we do. If you'd talked to me first, then the cover-up would have included me." I said, "Which is why you needed me to talk to you first." Silence. I stared through the windshield at the parking garage concrete. "You've always done this," she said finally. "You make everything about being right." I thought about what to say for a moment. "I make everything about being accurate." I said, "You've always confused those two things." She hung up. My father called that evening. His voice was careful in a way it hadn't been since the last time he needed something from me and knew better than to demand it. "Nora?" he said. "Whatever was in those documents, companies share counsel all the time. The connection you're implying isn't what you think it is. I'm not implying anything." I said. I documented what I found, and I presented it to the client I was engaged to serve. He was quiet for a moment. The sound of a man reassessing. Then he said, "You could have come to me first." I thought about the party, about Danielle's hand on my elbow, about my mother's voice explaining that I was independent, which is what our family calls difficult when they want to sound generous, about the corner table at every gathering where I had been placed, not because I needed quiet, but because quiet was what the room needed from me. I said, "When have you ever wanted to hear what I found first?" He didn't have an answer. He's never had that particular answer. We ended the call politely, which is the most dishonest way to end a call, and the most familiar. I drove home through Nashville streets that smelled like late summer. The kind of evening that makes you feel briefly that things are all right, even when they're not. I had a glass of water standing at my kitchen window looking out at the lights. Gerald called 3 days later. Not his attorney. "Gerald," he said, "I want to offer you a contract. Ongoing. Infrastructure security review. Quarterly. Plus incident, response retainer. Your terms." I said I needed to think about it. He said, "There's something else. The fund situation is with federal authorities now. I don't know what the investigation finds. But I want you to know that whatever comes of it, the work you did was correct and important. I've watched people compromise important work for smaller reasons than the ones you were handed." I thought about Danielle's hand on my elbow, about the particular geometry of standing in a room full of your family's ambitions and being offered as decoration. I said, "I wasn't handed reasons. I was handed pressure. It's not the same thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No. It isn't." I took the contract. Not the full position he'd described at our first meeting that would have made me his. And I've learned the hard way that belonging to an institution is different from serving one. I kept it clean. Independent. Work that could speak for itself without my name getting buried inside someone else's org chart. My parents stopped calling when they realized I wasn't going to renegotiate the findings. Danielle sent me an email 3 weeks after the meeting. 2 sentences. I hope you're proud of yourself and I don't think we should talk for a while. I read it twice, then archived it. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing in it that required a response. She wasn't asking a question. She was leaving a statement she wanted me to carry. I chose not to. I drove past the anniversary party venue once. A few weeks later, on the way back from a client call, the ballroom was lit for someone else's event. Different cars, different lights, the same vaulted windows catching the same city glow. I thought about standing there in Danielle's grip. The room full of money and longing and my family orbiting Gerald Marsh, like he was the son they'd been waiting for. And Danielle's voice, warm and sharpened, introducing me as the mystery that the family couldn't explain. Back then, in that room, it felt like a verdict. Looking back, it reads more like a confession. She needed me to be small enough that no one would look at me too closely. And she'd miscalculated. The way people do when they've confused invisibility with weakness. When they've spent so long not looking at something that they've stopped understanding what it can do. Systems don't care about your title or your spot at the table. They don't care about who your family knows or whose arm you hold walking into a room. They care about integrity. They care about the places where the data tells the truth, even when the people around it won't. If there's anything I've learned not from this story but from a decade of listening to infrastructure that humans pretend is simple, it's this. The most dangerous assumption you can make about a system is that the quiet parts aren't doing anything,